Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Reports of huge queues at Russia's border with Georgia have fueled speculation that Russians are once again preparing to flee the country ahead of a possible new mobilization. Georgia has rejected claims that more than 20,000 Russians entered the country in a single day, calling them disinformation. But with demand for housing in Armenia also surging, memories of the 2022 exodus are returning. So, are Russians preparing for another wave of mobilization? And what would another mass departure mean for Putin and Russia? Well, to explain this, we're joined by Krzysztof Jaworski, he's Director of International Affairs at the Institute for Security and International Development. Welcome back, Krzysztof, to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So what is going on at the border between Russia and Georgia?
To start with, we have only several information and the situation is rather new, so rather than drawing definite conclusions, I would focus on the question about the possibility of the new military mobilization in Russia and also about the possibility of capability of Russian state to make it impossible to flee Russia like it used to be in 2022. So what we know about this current situation and the border between Georgia and Russia is that there were several information, one of them by the Moscow Times, independent outlet, that around 20,000 people crossed this border out of Russia into Georgia in one day, and Georgian Ministry of Interior refused these claims and said that this is disinformation, and they provided specific data regarding the people coming inside Georgia and outside. To summarize these two numbers, it's about 20,000, but we are unable to verify it. However, why it is the topic? Why is it important? Because for the several months already, there are more and more rumors that the next wave of mobilization in Russia is coming, and the moment when it will take possibly part is after the September State Duma elections, which are going to take place in Russia. Before that, probably not, because it will make this operation of elections much harder. However, after it, if we look at the current numbers regarding the mobilized personnel, the losses and the needs of Russian military machine, such mobilization is one of the possible options. It has its own risks and costs. However, Moscow could decide that it's worth trying.
Okay, but it's not just Georgia, it's also Armenia, where house prices have gone up. In fact, people in Georgia, in Batumi, in fact, are complaining that this influx of Russians since 2022, I'm not just talking about yesterday, has pushed up prices, and that, they feel that the Russians have taken over the town. So, is this a form of occupation that is not military?
Well, the data and the information we have are complex and also uncertain. So if you look at this in this historical, let's call it perspective from 2022, the most people left Russia on September 2022 after the partial mobilization was announced, and also two other waves previously. One of the famous numbers which was widely discussed back then, it was about the IT specialists who left Russia, and these numbers were different. However, we could say that several tens or even hundreds of thousands of IT specialists left Russia. Well, we would say that it's great. However, at the same time, there were reports saying that significant part of these people still remotely worked for Russian companies. So it wasn't like the total loss of the specialists for the Russian economy. And to coming back to your question about this pushing up of prices of real estate in Armenia. Of course, people are leaving Russia from the very beginning of this war. People who have money, they are also hedging, let's call it this way. They are buying properties in different countries, so they could leave if the situation is worse, or if they could send their kids away, their children away, mainly sons. So I would say that it's one of the interesting indicators, but we have not enough information to draw the more specific picture.
Okay. Now, President Zelensky has said that Putin is trying to raise between 300 and 500,000 people in the upcoming mobilization. Is that realistic?
I would say that it is realistic. There are enough people in Russia to make the draft of such number. But the question is about the risks and the impact of such move. Because as for now, Moscow tries to avoid the mobilization of people from the larger cities. They focused on volunteers, they focused on villages, they focused on the people from the poorer regions, and those people were willing to become soldiers for the certain amount of money. And as for now, this mobilization of, not mobilization, this recruitment of volunteers, its pace is not enough to replace the losses which Russian army is suffering each month. So the question is whether they will manage somehow to attract more volunteers, or they would not be able to do so, and then they will have to try another way. And this way is mobilization. It could be made under this rather unofficial way, so-called creeping mobilization. It's happening already to some degree.
What's that?
That's mobilizing several people without announcing general mobilization. Not to make public opinion aware of this fact, not to make impact at social opinion in this matter.
Okay, now very briefly in the last minute or so that we have left, Krzysztof, another, let's say, up to 500,000 people, working age men, mostly I should imagine, going to the meat grinder on the border with Ukraine. Russia's already short of workers. I mean, unemployment is zero. They need people working in the fields and in the factories as well. How's this going to impact the economy?
That's a very important part of this equation. They are trading their future for the uncertain gains in this war. So yes, they will pay this price, but as for now, they are still very dangerous. As Prime Minister Sikorski said it, maybe Russia is a sick man, but sick man with a gun, and he said it in this studio. And I think it makes this very important point that, of course, if we look at a lot of indicators, a lot of data, economic data, data regarding human resources, data regarding demographics, because Russian demographics are also declining. Of course, that is all true, but it will hit them in the future, maybe in 1 year, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, but right now they are still able to attack, to maintain war, and maybe, possibly, to try to make some provocation against NATO. That is also important thing to have in mind. If we look at these all things which are negative for Russia, we should not underestimate the threat.
No, certainly. I think that would be a dangerous thing to do. Krzysztof Jaworski, as always, thank you very much for coming along and sharing your analysis with our audience.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.